So let's go ahead and get rolling. This is a bit of a different webcast for me. And the reason why it's a bit of a different webcast is there's this weird like train wreck of an intersection that happened recently in the world of IT security. So if we go all the way back to what my degree was in college when I graduated in 2000, it was in political science with an emphasis on international studies. And when I graduated, I went almost immediately after I graduated, and I went to Taiwan, and I was it's kind of weird. I was a teacher's assistant slash instructor in Hsinchu with the Ministry of Economic Affairs, and we were doing classes with a bunch of people around dumping and international trade law. And then somehow from that point, I ended up in computer security. And it's been very weird because, like, literally within the past couple of years, there's been a lot of new things that have been happening as it relates to China and but specifically how it relates to computer security and what we do vis-a-vis China. So this is going to be weird because it's going to be poli-sci, it's going to be policy, and there's going to be some history associated with it. But before I get started, I want to be honest. Some of my images in my presentation are AI generated. Not super proud about it, but I usually just go on the internet, do a Google image search, and steal a picture from somebody else's website anyway. So this is just me doing that, but with more steps involved. And I put in AI this picture, which is a legitimate picture from a Chinese policy paper dealing with China and the cyber great power that it wishes to become. I don't know what the simplified Chinese actually means. I can't read Chinese. And I sent this into ChatGPT and I was like, hey, could you please change this text to say, who wants that honey? And ChatGPT responded back and just blocked it out with a big black box over the text and said, okay, I did that. How did it look? And I'm like, ChatGPT, you didn't replace the text with who wants honey. You just put a big censor block over the text. And it's like, no. I actually put that translation in simplified Chinese. I could not get ChatGPT to replace the text with who wants that honey. And I think that there were some shenanigans at play. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. But let's go ahead and let's get started. Like I said, we're going to start way back. One of the things that we have to understand when we're looking at China and the way it looks currently at itself and the rest of the world when we're talking about cybersecurity is actually rooted back hundreds, if not 1,000 years ago. And it goes back to China definitely viewed and views itself as the Middle Kingdom. And if we're looking back up until the Qin dynasty around the turn of the century, where that kind of was evaporating, they looked at themselves as a superior state. All the rest of the states were actually barbaric. And to be completely honest with you, that was probably true. Because they actually figured out that bathing was important, which who would have thought? They had a number of different things that they had going for them. And the certain amount of things that they had in ancient China that allowed them to be an incredibly powerful empire turned out to be things that absolutely screwed them over towards the end of kind of like the ancient Chinese empire before we move into more modern China. And one of the things I think that's important is whenever you're looking at the way that China ran its bureaucracy, right? They looked at themselves like a cultural center, and there was a huge amount of focus on basically repetition, right? So if you look at Confucius, the Analects, if you wanted to be a bureaucrat, it wasn't just enough to study ancient text. You actually had to memorize the ancient text if you wanted any level of bureaucracy. And how high you could move up within the bureaucracy was very much based on your understanding of the ancient texts and your ability literally to memorize them and recite them, right? One of my professors who passed away, Dr. Weinberg Chai, his daughter Mei Li Chai, has a great book called My Lucky Face about Weinberg's mother, Mei Li's grandmother. And like just for grins, she actually memorized the entire Bible. So that idea of memorization was kind of ingrained in their bureaucrat status. And that mattered, right? And that mattered because you were able to create a very strong bureaucracy, which I'll talk about more here in just a little bit, that became sustainable, right? And there was a lot of power through influence. And eventually, this kind of led China to be isolated Whereas you had a lot of other countries that had imperialistic views, right? Like they would try and go and conquer other lands and explore other lands and expand. China looked at the rest of the world and was basically like, nah, y'all are just stinky and unwashed barbarians. We're cool over here. And they very much isolated themselves for hundreds of years because they had little to no interest whatsoever in the rest of the world. And while their approach to bureaucracy, which I'll talk about on another slide, was incredibly powerful for that phase, it absolutely screwed them over when the modern era started. Let's look around like 1900. All right. And I got this quick interlude on the Emperor Guangxu, whose picture is here, on clocks to give you an idea of what the problem was with China at the time. Turns out he loved clocks. He loved watches. A number of people that would actually visit him from the West, try to open up trade negotiations or anything, would bring him clocks. They would bring him watches because he was obsessed with the stupid things. And you would think if a guy like that is running all of China, the emperor, was really into clocks and watches, that China would develop some type of capability to build clocks and watches. It didn't work out that way. There was a lot of art that was done featuring clocks because, once again, Homeboy loves clocks. And the artistic class in China would basically try to draw pictures of the inside of clocks, and they were not technical at all, right? They were not technical at all. They were far more interested in the artistic merits. So that meant that there was no concept of like precise like drawings, like a technical drawing. You would have a drawing of the inside of a clock with all the gears, and then it would be like clouds and like unicorns, right? They were completely focused on the artistic and cultural aspects of it. And they saw little to no value from a technical perspective of like the coarse drawings that we would produce in the West for recreating a clock. And I think that that kind of sets the stage for China. They had this amazing bureaucratic system, and they were completely focused on the stability of the bureaucratic system, even through multiple different dynasties. A lot of dynasties would come in, and then they would end up with the exact same bureaucracy that they had before, but it did not have an emphasis on that technological excellence or technology really much at all because they didn't see any reason for it. It was merely a trinket that was interesting to them as well. So what this allowed them to do is kind of have this centralized power structure that was highly decentralized at the same time, which is kind of weird. So what happened is you had all the different provinces, and then you would have the people within the provinces, the state officials, the nobles, the scholars, the governors. They would be running their province. And most of the time, they had a tremendous amount of autonomy in what they could do in their provinces. So there was a consistency across China, and the fact that you had the Analects, you had Confucius, that was really ingrained in the bureaucratic system, and how that system perpetrated itself and permeated all parts of China. But at the exact same time, there was heavily decentralized control, right? You know, if you're the emperor, you got whatever you wanted, of course, but by and large, you let the provinces kind of do their own, right? It was also heavily merit based. And I know that sounds like a good thing, but it wasn't, right? Because the things that they were actually focusing on whenever they were talking about merit based was memorizing a handful of books, right? There was no incentive for a concept of innovation, right? Innovation was not seen as something that was a virtuous trait to have, right? The best traits that you could have would be kind of adherence to the system, adherence to your ancestors, adherence to the existence and the perpetuation of the state as it is, as it was, and as it was going to be, because that gave a tremendous amount of stability. And once again, if you're going back to ancient times, that's why the Chinese empires like lasted hundreds of years, because of that amazing stability that you had in that system. And a lot of it was built on merit-based memorization and administrative excellence. So whenever you would have like the different dynasties that would like move forward, and there would be a revolution and then a new dynasty, I have meet the same boss, the same as the old boss. You would have a new emperor that would take over, but the bureaucratic system and the gears that existed did not change very much at all. So that created stability, and it also created the concept of revolution. If there was problems with leadership, that you could get rid of leadership, but then that exact same system would just carry forward because that system worked and it worked great. But then things start to fall apart, right? If we're talking about like clocks, if we're talking about technology, especially around the turn of the century in the 1900s, right? When we started to get to that point, there was massive strain in that system. And we see this manifest in about 20 years after 1900, kind of after the emperor I just talked about, going into Empress Dowager. And we see this strain start to persist. And you really see it exemplified, especially in communist China, in things like the Great Leap Forward, right? During the Great Leap Forward, there was a lot of stuff under Mao Zedong where the different provinces would get into these competitions with each other to try to impress Mao and the centralized control. And they would say, well, we're going to give X bushels of wheat to the central authority. And the other provinces would be like, well, we can't underdo that. And then they would say, well, we're going to give X bushels plus 20% because we can't be outdone by them. And it would just escalate to literally they gave all their food to centralized control, like up into Beijing, and 26 million people starved to death, right? And that was because of this system that basically it was very decentralized and there was kind of also competition within those provinces. So you're getting into this problem and technological concepts in Chinese bureaucracy. And I know that there's scholars that are listening. There's like, dude, you're skipping a lot. That's true. It's a 1 hour webcast and we haven't even gotten to the hacking yet. But it created a massive problem in how you try to run a large country that's decentralized, multiple provinces, all doing their own thing, and you still have a centralized power setting direction, and then you have the different provinces fighting with each other. So you would see this problem start to manifest, and then everything collapses. It just collapses in horrible, horrible ways because what China had was a stable bureaucratic system. They had lots of people, like tons of people, all the way back then. And today there's still tons of people, which means it's an amazing opportunity for markets, right? And what are you going to sell? Well, opium, right? During the height of the British Empire, right around the turn of the century, like their number one export was opium, which is freaking wild, right? Like if you're looking at the United Kingdom, they say it was basically built on cake and sodomy, right? Or rum and sodomy. Cake and sodomy is I can't remember the name of the Marilyn Manson song, so I got those two things confused. Rum and sodomy. Sodomy's still in there, whether it's cake or rum, doesn't really matter. And you had this entire empire that was built on opium and selling a tremendous amount of that opium and really trying to exploit China and also India, which is a whole nother conversation that we can have about the massive amount of people that died in India at that time as well. And there was a lot of corruption that was built into the system in the provinces where you go on, you pay off like a local governor. And at this particular point, the centralized authority in China was very, very weak. So there was a tremendous amount of corruption, and there was just thousands and thousands of people hooked on opium, and the foreign influence was absolutely horrific. So now you enter in the Boxer Rebellion, right? So this is under Empress Dowager, and you end up with a whole bunch of people, the Boxers. And by the way, Boxers were people that would do Kung Fu. They would call it like Chinese boxing instead of Kung Fu or whatever type of martial arts that they would do. And they basically say, we're going to go against foreign influence because they've had it, right? We have these imperialistic, really, they looked at them as barbarians because once again, they smelt bad because they literally did. And they came to a conclusion that they had to kick out the foreign influence. So now you enter up the Boxer Rebellion, which is a war, and it did not go well. Okay. It didn't go well at all for the Chinese. And there's a number of reasons why it didn't go well at all. Once again, really weak central authority. But one of the biggest reasons why it didn't go well is China had crap navy. It was really just bad. And this is just one of them. There's a number of reasons. And what that meant is kind of the imperialist forces, which is like the entire world is like, China, you're trying to stop us from selling opium? No, we're all going to get together and force this to happen. If you want a really good book from like the American side, Smitty Butler's War is a Racket is a fantastic read to talk about this because he was doing all of this stuff and he's like, why the hell are we here? Like, I don't get it. Then he realized, oh, it's for corporations to open up markets via gun. Um, so you have this Boxer Rebellion. It doesn't go well for the Chinese for a number of different reasons. But one of the major reasons was their technologies were like completely backwards and completely out of date. They specifically did not have a navy that could be like you could think of, and that allowed their adversaries to basically make a determination on where the battle space was going to be. They could just move down the shore a little bit, drop, and then attack and invade. So it was really kind of a short-lived rebellion, even though it did last like 20 years, goes all the way back up to the Boxer Rebellion, the Opium Wars. There's a lot there that I'm skipping over. But anyway, this is the end of the Qin dynasty, right? And after this, you enter into something where they negotiate a peace. Now, it's interesting because people believe that China negotiated that peace far quicker than they should have. There's a strong belief that if China did actually have a strong leader, they could have mounted a defense of China and probably expelled the invaders. But that's another story. But at any rate, they negotiate this peace. One horrific tax goes on the Chinese empire, just unbelievable amounts of gold. It's like pretty much their entire economy is basically given up as part of this Boxer protocol. But there were some other things in the Boxer protocol that were really horrific, right? Now, to be sure, Boxers were executing foreigners. That was something that absolutely happened. The extent of how much it happened is up to some level of debate, but it did happen. And as part of that, in the Boxer protocol, they literally wrote in that people that were in charge of the Boxer Rebellion either had to do public suicide or public execution. And these, like the suicide was relatively quick, which once again is horrific. And the public executions were not fast. Like it wasn't shooting someone, beheading someone. It was long, protracted, humiliating, just like executions, where you keep someone alive in torturous state for days until they starved or they dehydrated or like don't read it, but just to say the British were really creative whenever it came to public executions. So now you have this entire country that has this trauma of seeing this humiliation. And it wasn't just like, oops, somebody else took over. Literally, people are being executed in the streets publicly over this. And it's because foreigners won. Not another group in China, foreigners won, which is traumatic, right? So you have this trauma of kind of the imperialist states kind of coming in and forcing their will on top of China. And then the Japanese show up, right? And then you get into World War II. And if you really want to read a horrific book, once again, My Lucky Face is a great book by Mei Li Chai. Also, The Rape of Nanking. It's horrific, right? And that was just one city, right? And we have recordings of what happened in that city because there were white people there that could actually record it. That happened in multiple cities across China. So you have widespread rape, you have public beheadings, you have mass death, once again, at the hands of foreigners. So you get to the end of World War II, China starts looking in, right? They start trying to kind of isolate themselves out. And then you also have Chiang Kai-shek in 48, who leaves China and goes to Taiwan. And that is another part of the century of humiliation, right? They lose Hong Kong, they lose Taiwan, they lose Mongolia, they lose all these different states. And Chiang Kai-shek goes to Taiwan. And not only does he go to Taiwan, but it gets even worse. He takes a whole crap ton of their art with him. Like if you actually want to see true art in China, you don't go to China, you go to Taiwan because Chiang Kai-shek's like took all of that, right? And they have museums at the Chiang Kai-shek and the Sun memorials, and you can see those, and it's fantastic, right? Amazing art. And it's been a source of contention for a long time. Now, to be fair, a lot of that art, if it would have stayed in China, would have been burned. But still, that's humiliation, right? And then China's locked off up until Nixon, right? And Nixon starts to open up China and they come into the war now, or into the world. Now, what's interesting is when did that end? When did the century of humiliation end? Now, there's some scholars in China that say it ended at the end of World War II, because then China is part of the Security Council and they're elevated to one of the big victors from the Allies. Not necessarily, right? Then there's some people that say that the century of humiliation didn't end until after the Korean War, right? Because they believe that there was some pushback against the West. There are some that argue that it ended when China got Hong Kong back. There you go. That's the end of the century of humiliation. And once again, we're getting past a century at this point. There are a lot of people in China that say it still hasn't ended, but they're still in the century of humiliation because they still do not have Taiwan back. And that is one of the core goals of many people in charge of China. All right. So we just said a lot of like talking about the historical aspects of it, right? But I want to talk about Chinese hacking starting in about 2013. All right. When you look at what happened to China up until 2013, like if we're looking at communist China, you're looking at capitalism with Chinese characteristics and how they built it up. The bureaucracy comes back, right? The decentralization comes back. The conformity comes back. And this persists for a long, long, long time, up until about 2013, especially in, well, not especially, but one of the areas is in cyber. Because you have a whole bunch of generals that have their own little power structures. You have a whole bunch of provinces that have their own little private power structures. And their goals and objectives are against each other. In many situations, they don't even know and they cross over each other. The RSA breach was really interesting. When RSA was breached, they gained access to all of the seed files, the XML files that allowed you to see what was on an RSA token, to every RSA token on the freaking planet, which is for me one of the biggest hacks ever, right? But the funny thing about it was the group that didn't communicate with a whole bunch of other groups, and they got caught because they weren't very good at OPSEC post-exploitation. And it just kind of showed how decentralized Chinese hacking actually was. So there's a tremendous amount of corruption, like a ridiculous amount of corruption and infighting going back and forth. And this picture on the right, it should look familiar to you, right? If you're looking at how the Communist Chinese Party is set up, it looks a lot like the pictures that you see and how ancient Chinese political hierarchy was created, right? So once again, you got Mao Zedong's book, right? You got people, going through DD Mao, DD Mao, DD Mao. We're going to memorize everything Mao Zedong said. And that's going to drive the way that we build our bureaucracy and everything. So it literally came back to the exact same structure. So you get to like 2013, right? And when you get with 2013, there's a shift that starts to happen, right? China realizes, there's a paper I'll talk about here in just a second, that this system doesn't work, right? It didn't really work all that well going into the Boxer Rebellion and the Opium Wars. And then they kept using it through the Communist Party and the Great Leap Forward and all these different things. But it's really hard in China, whether in ancient China or communist China, to critique the system, because the system works for the people that created the system. So there's not an incentive for them to destroy the system, right? So you have this massive amount of corruption, and really starting in 2013, there's this huge push to destroy corruption. So you have all these stories that come out of China, especially in the military, where there's corruption, where they literally execute people that are engaged in widespread corruption, which is amazing, right? And they're trying to fight that. And then the one thing that they keep through all of this is IP theft, right? If you're going back to 2013, even earlier, stealing of intellectual property is just something you got to do in China to keep their economy humming the way that it's actually humming. But in 2013, something kind of changes, right? But I want to do a quick interlude because there's changes that are gradual that happen in China between 2013 and now. And then there's this thing that happens in the middle between 2013 and now, where it changes China's view on everything as it relates to cyber. So this is an interlude slide. 2013, things are slowly starting to change to the new system, but the war in Ukraine changes everything, right? The reason why the war in Ukraine changes everything is because Russia failed, right? Now you can argue, oh, there's still a war going on. There is, but if you remember, this war was supposed to be over. The generals in Russia's army were making dinner reservations in Kiev for the first day of the war. They fully expected that they were going to take over. They were going to take over Ukraine, and they were going to be having dinner and having chicken Kiev for dinner, right? That night. That didn't happen. Now, there's a number of reasons, a whole lot of reasons why it didn't happen, right? There was corruption in the Russian military. Equipment wasn't kept up to date. The training standards has slipped. A lot of the people that were in the military and Russian soldiers were doing things like selling their fuel so they could get cigarette money so they could party. All kinds of really bad things were happening in the Russian military. But one of the key things that Russia failed at was they did not assert dominance in cyberspace in the early phase of the war, the current phase of the war that we're in now. And they didn't get into the Ukrainian systems and shut down Ukrainian communications. They didn't shut down Ukrainian power at the level and the consistency that they were planning on doing. They failed at almost every possible stage of cyber warfare against Ukraine, which means Ukraine was able to keep the communications moving, which means Ukraine was able to be nimble in trying to react and coordinate attacks against Russia, which means that Ukraine was able to maintain a fog of war that Russia wasn't able to see effectively what Ukraine was actually doing in a way that Ukraine was able to. Right now, there was a lot of assistance of Western companies and also Western governments, especially in the area of intelligence, which is a whole nother presentation. But China's watching all of this and they're thinking Taiwan, and they're looking at Russia as kind of a case study for how an eventual invasion of Taiwan would go. Like, how would the world react to it? Would they immediately come to Ukraine's aid? They should have, right? According to the treaties in 1994, when Ukraine gives up its nukes, we said that we would come in. If anyone invaded Ukraine, we would come in and assist them. Kind of didn't, right? Even though there was treaties associated with it, because at the time Ukraine was like the world's #2 nuclear superpower because they had so many nukes in Ukraine when the Soviet Union fell. So that's interesting to China because they're like, well, maybe if we invade Taiwan, maybe Taiwan won't get assistance. And Taiwan did. Not direct military assistance like boots on ground, but they did get a lot of cyber assistance. They did get financial assistance. They got weapons assistance. But that cyber thing is kind of a thorn in the side of China, right? They watched very closely to see the failures of Russia and how it absolutely screwed the Russian invasion going into Ukraine. It's so interesting to me that China is starving for information from a cyber perspective in the war with Ukraine and Russia, that China is actively hacking Russia right now because they don't believe that they're getting straight, truthful answers from the Russian government about how things are going in Ukraine. So they're literally hacking their own allies to get information about how the war is going, right? So when you're looking at all of this stuff, right, when you're looking at this interlude, this feeds into what started in 2013, right, as a policy idea paper. And you can download this and you can read the paper. And I can share those links at the end. But it's really interesting to me how China realized that like the traditional approaches to cyber warfare were not going to work. And the reason why the traditional approaches to cyber warfare were not going to work is because a decentralized cyber force, right, or cyber great power, which is what China is trying to become, honestly, is becoming, won't work unless you get everyone together on the same page. And that means all these provinces and all these generals all doing their own cyber thing needs to be unified in its goals, its focus, its mission, and its technological capabilities. It has to, right? It has to if you want to do something like this, because doing just general brute force kind of mediocre crap hacking ain't going to work, right? Now, once again, to be fair, China had already started that. They started up the Strategic Support Force in 2015 to start unifying a lot of the cyber offensive operations together. And granted, they were moving in that direction, but it wasn't very quick because you literally have hundreds of years of history in the scattered, kind of decentralized, bureaucratic chaos that they were working against. So even though the SSF was created in 2015, that didn't really get accelerated until the Ukraine war, and then literally last year it exploded in the unification of Chinese cyber operations underneath one specific group and being really driven from a centralized perspective and a goal and a focus of what they were trying to do. And I think that this is kind of an important inflection point because I think historically we look at China as a mild annoyance, right? They had some really good things, like the RSA attack was pretty good. But if you actually look and you know how that attack happened, it was an Excel spreadsheet that was fished into somebody's organization. I can't remember the name of the rat, the remote access Trojan that was put into it, but even that was lame. Like it was spear phishing. There was no real 0 day cutting edge. It was just bad security on the part of like RSA, right? It wasn't cutting edge stuff. And I think if you kind of compare that with what Russia is capable of, and you look at like SolarWinds and the XZ package exploit, which may be China, maybe the NSA, who knows? Those are pretty advanced techniques. And China, up until relatively recently, wasn't doing them, right? They were kind of doing hacking through brute force. And I'm not crapping on that. That worked for them, right? Quantity has a quality all its own, and China had that for an extended period of time. So let's leave our interlude and let's talk about last yearish, right? So Zhang Bijan created this paper in 2013, and once again, I cannot stress how dangerous it is to create a policy paper in China that is talking in any way at all negative about the existing structures. Um, it's just not done, right? It can be done in conversations. It can be done in a number of different ways, but to go and say that things don't work and we need to change is really impressive, right? And when we're talking about this and we're talking about Xi Jinping and the way that he's looking at it, China looks at the three domains that they have to excel at are air, sea, and cyber, right? They have to be superior in their Air Force. They have to be superior in their Navy, and they have to be superior from a cyber perspective. Now, the overwhelming majority of anytime you read any defense papers in China is built around defense of mainland China and not a lot in offense, right? Like they don't have a lot of goals to take over the United States, right? They don't look at it that way. There's absolutely a lot of conversations about taking over Taiwan, but they just consider that to be a continuation of the Civil War that kind of stagnated in 1948, right? So that is not seen to them as an imperialist, outward facing cyber agenda, right? It just isn't. And you see this manifest in China with robotics, which we'll talk about at the end. You see this manifest in China and trying to get away from as much oil and gas as they can. They're moving to renewables and nuclear as fast as they can because they don't want to be dependent on the outside world for much anything. And also, if you look at that air, sea, and cyber, it kind of goes back to the Boxer Rebellion. Because in the Boxer Rebellion, they didn't have a navy. And their adversaries, because they lacked that one area, their adversaries were able to ruthlessly exploit it to exploit China and win the war. So when you're looking at China heavily focused on air, sea, and cyber, I know this sounds strange, but it's very, very much defensive in mindset. Because China still looks at itself as the Middle Kingdom, right? They still look at themselves as kind of that cultural center of the universe. And now they're starting to look at themselves as a technological center of the universe as well. And if you read articles and things about executives coming back from China, they're absolutely freaking out about what China is doing on the technological front. So we're looking at that as defensive, except for Taiwan, right? Offensive is definitely going to be part of that. But they generally look at that, the skills that they would develop and the technologies in air, sea, and cyber is Taiwan's not that far away, right? So if they can actually defend the Taiwanese like islands whenever they take them over, everything that they do to prepare for that will also help them protect the mainland as well. So they don't have to repeat an embarrassment like the Boxer Rebellion. Also, you're looking at this concept of power as influence, right? Whenever they look at there is a lot of conversations in Russia and China that look at the imperialism that happened around the 1900s, and in their view, all the way up through World War II, continuing into the present day, perpetrated by Western powers as one, incredibly sloppy, um, two, horrifically immoral from an imperialistic perspective. So anytime in China people start talking about, well, maybe we should, take over another country, like let's say India, that kind of gets shot down. And once again, you can talk about Tibet, you can talk about all these places. And honestly, China looks at those as theirs. Like that was part of their original sphere of influence. And they're trying to get back what they lost, which should sound familiar because if we go back to Russia, they don't look at the war in Ukraine as like a takeover of Ukraine. They look at it as getting back the original Soviet footprint, right? And that's what they're trying to get back to. So it's weird. So how does that manifest outside of that sphere, outside of Taiwan, outside of Nepal, outside of like Tibet and things like that? Well, it's that power, and they got like this road and belt system where they invest heavily in infrastructure in a variety of different countries in Africa, in Eastern Europe, so that they invest and they get influence. Now, this is interesting, right? This gets into some weird monetary policies where if you print a bunch of money and you give it to your citizens, inflation is a huge problem. Whereas if you print a bunch of money and you give it in the form of aid to a country on the other side of the planet, inflation isn't that much of an issue because that money is over there and then it eventually trickles back for demand on goods and services and technologies, right? So they're trying to use that power as influence, money as influence, because there's this huge transfer of wealth that's happening from the West to the East. And they're taking that money and they're reinvesting it so they have influence because their goal isn't to like make parts of Africa Chinese. Their goal is to make sure that their power and influence allows them to continue to have that influence and power. And it also doesn't come back to bite them in the ass in the form of some other country getting that area. And then they can attack China because they get the funds, they get the resources that they need. Rare earth elements are a huge part of that as well. And once again, when we're looking at China, especially looking at last year and even the last couple of years, they're now very much unified in their command and focus, right? And they're also doing a lot of hitting at obtuse angles. They're not using a lot of malware. They're using a lot of living off the land, trying to avoid traditional like EDR technologies, going after, telco. We'll talk about some of those here in the next couple of slides. But you're seeing this huge change. And this is what I mean by this isn't your father's China, right? It's not this huge country that's kind of all of these different provinces doing their own thing, working against each other, internal political jockeying that's not public. It's like, no, this is now unified and they're doing some really, really crazy stuff. So if we look at Salt Typhoon, right? Um, Ministry of State Security is driving this operation, right? And they have some badass rootkits, right? Demodex, weirdly enough, Kaspersky was the first to actually reverse engineer that. And there's a heavy focus on edge exploitation, right? Looking at firewalls and edge routers and things of that nature. And this is a shout out to the future. I'm going to talk about shadow brokers here in a couple of seconds, and also telecom and infrastructure, right? And it's not ransomware, right? Like they're not trying to get in and take over and then say, give us 100 Bitcoin. That's not their goal. Their goal is intelligence. Their goal is control, right? If they can get into telco and they can start monitoring SMS text messages. Once again, understand China is a country that has had massive trauma against it, and they don't ever want that trauma to happen again. So if you can get inside of the communication structure and you can like get intelligence and you can see what your adversaries are doing, then it helps you see into the future and avoid that trauma from ever happening again. So they want to dwell, they want to watch, they want to be aware of what Western governments are doing vis-a-vis China, because they're very paranoid about a repeat or even a continuation of the century of humiliation. Now that's Volt Typhoon, right? Now it's the Salt Typhoon. Now we're at Volt Typhoon. So once again, remember Ukraine? When we get to Volt Typhoon, we now see China having this heavy focus on critical infrastructure, right? Because if they get into a hot war, they don't want to be in a situation where they're actively trying to hack when the hostilities, the physical kinetic hostilities start. They want to be able to move instantaneously and do kill switches against their adversaries. So, and this also goes to Salt Typhoon, right? Because if you're in the middle of the telco communications, you can shut them down, or you're inside of the OODA loop, the communication loop, and it's almost impossible to win a military action if your adversary knows everything that you're doing from a communication perspective, which is why you should never do classified things like on a cell phone. That would be crazy. Don't ever do that, kids. All right, so now they're going into critical infrastructure. And once again, living off the land as much as they possibly can. And their dwell time was insane. I think Volt Typhoon, I think the dwell time for something was all the way back to 2023. They think possibly earlier, right? And it's not just backdoors and remote command and control, but it's also kill switches. If you can introduce kill switches into code, right? Not just a backdoor, but like a DOS condition inside of the code so you can kill that device, kill that communication, that is much harder to detect. And that's something that terrifies me. Anytime you hear about a company that's like, well, our source code repository was compromised, but we see no backdoors. It's like, okay, but did they put a kill switch, like a DOS condition to bring things down? And once again, living off the land is part of it and a heavy aversion to malware. They would much rather have traditional credentials set up, ready to rock and roll. They would much rather have kill switches so they can shut things down. And they would much rather dwell and monitor. It's kind of weird, but their evolution is really becoming kind of like the NSA, right? The NSA wants to dwell. The NSA wants to capture and collect as much information as they possibly can. There's huge debates that happen in the NSA and the CIA and the FBI and DOD and all of these different groups. The NSA wants to dwell. And if another group comes in and they're like, we want to act, the NSA, I have literally seen shut down operations or attempt to because they're afraid of burning an intelligence source, a SIGINT intelligence source. And you've kind of seen that with China. The NSA wants to dwell, they want to sit, they want to lurk, they want to gather all this intelligence. And as soon as you start taking action on that intelligence, it can burn that resource. And we're seeing China have that type of evolution on it as well. The other thing that we're seeing China do is they're keeping their talent in-house. There, you know, there was, in a lesser extent, is a huge brain drain out of China. Like you would have all of these people go study abroad and they would learn amazing technical skills, and a lot of them wouldn't come back. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they left China. You would still see espionage or espionage type situations where students would be giving information back to China, or they would get a job in a company and they would be doing espionage and they were doing their job and doing a great job. But if China asked them for something, they would happily do it, right? They would give it. And China kind of shifted in the last, I could be wrong on this, but I would say 24 months, right? Where they stopped exporting as many students globally as they did. And there's probably a number of reasons for that. But they also banned a lot of their top talent from going to capture the flags. Things like the international coding competition, right? Or things like DEF CON. You don't have as many Chinese or any Chinese participants at all. And this once again goes back to the bureaucratic state. Let's keep that talent in-house. Let's close things off. Let's try to side it down as much as we can. And they also realized that a lot of their top talent, when we're talking about that bureaucratic state, they realized that there was a huge stifling of innovation, especially in the space of hacking, where a lot of the techniques that they would use and continue to use would be the same techniques that you would see in any red teaming class, OSCP, SANS classes. Now, a lot of that shit was stolen, right? They stole that training. And H.D. Moore has a great story, if you can find it on YouTube, about doing presentations in China. And they would just move them to location, 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 to auditoriums of people. And it's weird, but they had this voracious appetite for hacking, but there wasn't a lot of like crazy innovation. And now that's starting to change, right? if you're looking at a lot of the techniques that they were using in Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon to a lesser extent, but Volt Typhoon, you're now seeing some really cutting edge level techniques starting to percolate up. Not a handful of rootkit technologies, but some really novel techniques that were going on. So you would have education, you would have internal capture the flags, you would have internal recruitment to keep that talent in house, to have them stay in China. Now, some of those people would go to the government, right? They would get hired on as hackers for the government in China. And then some of them would go to industry and they would go to Chinese corporations, cybersecurity corporations, and they would do cybersecurity. That anything you would see a standard Western company do for cybersecurity, these companies in China would do as well. The problem is when you're talking about industry, when you're talking about corporations and you're talking about the government, it's kind of a weird, I don't even want to say it's a blurred line. There's almost a non-existent line between these things to deal with, right? You just don't have that you would expect. It was a big change, right? So you're starting to see a lot of companies in China that are doing Chinese hacking, right? And one of the more interesting ones was NoSec. They were actually breached last week, and a whole bunch of stuff showed up on GitHub. And they had a ton of edge exploits for routers and switches, and not switches, but like routers and firewalls. So going back to what we saw with the NSA and what they were doing with shadow brokers, we're seeing China do that exact same methodology, right? If something works, steal it, right? And these companies are hired by the government to do hacking on their citizens, hacking of their own internal corporations. And also these companies are doing offensive cyber campaigns against the West. And that is huge, right? If you don't have the in-house capability for the government, hire it out for a corporation and allow them to do it as well, because they're moving into supply chain attacks, right? And I'm talking kind of mixing Russia and China, but this is the success that we have seen our adversaries do, where they've learned from the best. They learned from us. They learned from shadow brokers. They learned from Vault. They learned from the CIA. They learned from the NSA. And they're starting to use these amazingly complicated and very effective techniques to try to gain access to supply chain, and edge things that are out there. And I talk about Andreas Friend. He was the one that picked up the XY utility attack. He literally detected it because his SSH login session was slower than it was the day before. So he started researching, well, was there an update? There was an update. What was the code? What changed in the code? And it was funny, whenever he first released it and said, hey, I think there might be something weird going on here, there were actually people that were like, dude, you're being paranoid. But I want you to think about that XZ utility attack. Whoever set that up spent 5 years doing code commits, legitimate code commits, before they got full commit access, and then they dropped their back door. That was a long-term operation that was burned within 24 hours because one obsessive compulsive administrator was able to reverse engineer the update. That has to be taken into your threat model. It has to be. Absolutely. Moving forward, we're talking about defense. That's why extrusion detection is so important. Now, these are some slides that I gave at SaintCon. Richard Bachelor changed my life. This book, Extrusion Detection, was amazing. It was fantastic because signature-based detection is not enough. What is leaving your network? And, I talk about active countermeasures and AC Hunter and Rita. We detected, the Solar Winds attack before it was public. Now, we didn't know it was this huge thing, to be completely fair, but we detected it because the group that we partner with, Algiers not China, in Germany, they have a very strong culture of threat hunting. Right? Not just waiting on signatures to tell them what's going on, a very strong concept of threat hunting. We also had one of the large telco providers that, our software detected the Salt Typhoon, once again, because they had a threat hunting methodology. And you have these people all the time. They're like, we just want something that stops the attacks. It's a big red button, stops it. AI, single pane of glass, SOAR. And I think that all of that crap is important, but it ain't going to save you, right? So all of this is kind of free. Once again, you can go to activecountermeasures.com, go check out Rita. Doesn't cost anything, and it does a lot of the stuff, and it works great. So let's move on. So I want to kind of wrap this up because all of this is happening where China is greatly improving their skills and we're kind of screwed. Like we kind of screwed ourselves over. And we got AI in security when we desperately need it. And by the way, a quick note on this picture. I asked AI to create a picture of Fred Astaire dancing with the Terminator over a destroyed wasteland. And the Terminator says, I love humans. And Fred Astaire says, I love AI. And it did. And it came up with this picture, which is perfect. Except Fred Astaire has 3 arms. And I asked ChatGPT, I was like, dude, why does Fred Astaire have 3 arms? And it said, Fred Astaire has 3 arms because it's dancing with 2 of those arms and it needs a third arm to keep the beat. Do you want me to change it? And I said, no, ChatGPT, you're perfect. Keep being you. I can't argue with that logic, right? All right. So we have this crazy rise in complexity. If we think back to Active Directory, a lot of the exact same issues that we had in Active Directory, we still have. We have not solved those problems. In fact, we haven't solved many of the problems. And then we have these huge black boxes where crap happens. We don't know how it happens in the cloud. And it's like, okay, well, magic, right? Complexity is constantly growing and it's getting harder and harder and harder. And in the midst of all this complexity, we got AI. And AI shows up and it's going to solve a lot of our problems. And I'm not being facetious. We need artificial intelligence to help us deal with the 80% of the things that could be automated so we can focus on the harder 20% of the new technologies that are being dropped on our heads literally all the time. So I want to give you kind of an example of how we're screwing ourselves, right? So a long time ago, back in the day, 2023, we had a wide variety of web security quality. When we're testing, we would see security quality be very high on some apps, and then we would see it be crap on some others. And something happened in 2024. We saw a tightening of that quality to the middle, or as I say, a standardization of mediocrity. And no, this is not a good thing, right? And it's not a good thing for a number of reasons. One, the really high quality security web apps that we're seeing just are kind of disappearing. And instead, we're getting this like vanilla, mediocre. It's got some security there. It ain't great. It ain't bad, but it really ain't great. And like things like business logic errors are becoming very, very easy to exploit. We're seeing the standardization. And Cameron was the first of our testers. She told me about this. And I started talking to some other testers. And they're like, yeah. And then I started talking to other firms. And they're like, yeah, we're kind of seeing the same thing. And one of the other problems with the standardization of mediocrity is we are like kind of coming to this crappy middle and we're kind of losing people that know how to fix the issues. Because some of the issues when we're pen testing, we're like, this is the problem. Can you fix it? And they're like, we don't know how. It was vibe coded. So that's a problem, right? But we're so busy in trying to develop code faster that we're losing focus on the quality and we don't even know whether or not it's quality because the people that understand the quality are either moving on or getting phased out. So we've got some big problems on this. So with that mediocrity, we got AI, okay? And maybe security would be better, right, than web development. Maybe in security, it would help us because we need something to help us deal with that 80%. Automate as much as we possibly can so that we can focus on new technology and deal with the complexity and we can go threat hunting just in time. And a lot of executives say, wait, with AI, does that mean we can just fire half of our security team? God damn it, so much. We're shooting ourselves in the foot. China is up in their game. They're getting a lot more skilled at what they're doing. They're getting unified in what they're doing. And we've got AI. We've got this amazing tool that can help us. And we're using it to create mediocre crap code, which China's going to be able to exploit. And we're using it to create mediocre crap security teams. So instead of being able to use this tool to augment and help us, they're now using it as a way to try to cut costs. Right at the point where our adversary is getting stronger now than they've ever been. They're on the upswing in their technical capabilities. We're on the downswing. And seriously, the fundamentals are still in play. Because if you understand the core fundamentals, you know how to do prompt injection. If you understand the core fundamentals, you get better results out of AI. And we're not hiring junior analysts anymore. We need this because we need humans to do the hard things. We need humans to do hunting because our adversaries, the Chinese, are hitting us at oblique angles that we aren't going to see coming. We need AI to be watching the traditional stuff so that we can go hunting in the new technologies in the periphery and the odd stuff that's coming in. I also want to point out that in China, SSP also equals psychological manipulation. There's this great paper, which I'll share, that is from the United States government when they're talking about this is a great paper of a lot of not psyops, but intelligence that's been gathered against China. And there's documents from the PLA that talks to mind dominance, which the PLA defines the use of information to influence public opinion to affect change in the national social system and create an environment favorable to the PRC. Psychological cognitive warfare, emerging technologies and AI to enhance their operations to create deepfakes. It isn't just that China is using their influence in social media and everything that they're doing to turn us against each other in the West, because they are. They're also using it to turn us into the monsters that the opposition wants us to be. This has nothing to do with computer security, but this has everything to do with us. When you are looking at the left and the right, and I'm going to speak specifically here in the West, talk about the United States. If you're looking at all the problems in this world are because of the Democrats. If you're looking at all the problems in this world are because of the Republicans. If you feel like we're getting more and more entrenched and becoming the stereotypical, like bleeding heart liberal, or the stereotypical, like crazy Republican, we are. And it's all intentional. It's all intentional. The rise of, like crazy extremism on the left is intentionally fueled and fostered by China and by Russia. The crazy right wing, like, holy crap, we now have neo-Nazis marching in Germany, or not in Germany, in the United States. That's intentionally fostered. We're seeing this again and again and again, and it's being created by China. So anytime at all that you wake up in the morning and you think the greatest threat America is facing is the Democrats, if you think the greatest threat America is facing is the Republicans, the Chinese are winning and the Russians are winning. So how do we counter all of this? Well, I fundamentally believe deep in my heart that education is the solution to every single problem that we have. Every single problem that we have in the world can be solved by education. Even when it's bad, education makes it better. And I do the pay what you can classes. I actually have a pay what you can class coming up here in a little bit. Maybe Zach, Ryan, or Jason, or somebody can put in a link. But I have a pay what you can class coming up. And I would be incredibly honored if you could come. And I would be even more honored if you could help us find people that maybe aren't getting those entry-level jobs, because those entry-level jobs are coming back. They absolutely will come back. But we need to still be training that generation. And these entry-level classes, pay what you can, is what we're trying to do. You can go to this link, Free Labs Free. It's the same labs that I use for my classes. I'd love to get you guys signed up with that. If you give us your address, it's completely optional. You don't have to. You don't have to give us anything other than your email address if you want to. But if you give us your address, Deb and Jason will send you something cool. I don't know what cool is because we're out of stuff, but we're going to send you something cool. All right. So please check that out. And I want to say thank you so much for coming to this session. It's a bit weird. I know it's a bit strange. I went over a lot of history and I went over, oh, you got some echo? We went over a lot of history, but I think understanding the context of what we're dealing with and how it's fundamentally different from what we were dealing with before 2024 is incredibly important. I hope it didn't bore the hell out of you with a lot of poli-sci and history. So Jason, what do we do now?
Yeah, so a couple things. First of
Good
all,
job, John.
if you didn't check in for Hackett, please do that. That's in Discord live. If you need the link to Discord, you can go ahead and ask. We'll drop it into the chat. John, I normally ask people to just sum up everything that you talked about in one final thought, but you did that when you talked about education. And you,
This before.
yeah,
Yeah.
I know. Before. What we are going to stick around for is I want to see if there are any questions. So far, there's been a very minimum questions. I think people have just been listening and learning, but if people do have questions, they can feel free to ask them. And then we'll do that for a couple minutes. And then if anybody wants to stick around to know what it's like to do business with Black Hills Information Security, we have Tom here, CJ here, and we can tell you what it's like to get a pen test, threat hunt, any of the other stuff we do, including corporate sales for anti-siphon training. So if you and your team would like training, including private training, you can always reach out to us for that. So I'm looking for any questions so far. John, what is the significance of the honey quote?
Honey. Oh, so Xi Jinping. So this is all rumor. I don't know if this is true. But Xi Jinping, the current leader of China, he kind of looks like Winnie the Pooh. And there's this kind of ongoing joke and meme on the internet that they will actively go about trying to censor anybody that brings up Winnie the Pooh in relationship to Xi Jinping. So I did the picture of Xi Jinping, and I thought I'd put a quote from Smashing Pumpkins: "Who wants that honey?" And I was trying to convert it into Chinese. That was the reference to the honey quote, which is probably enough to get this entire presentation banned,
Yeah.
and throttled on YouTube. So
Yeah.
by the way, Xi Jinping, I just want you to know, from me to you, if somebody's listening, if you're listening to this first, I don't think anybody can argue with your leadership capabilities, and what you have done in China have been amazing. I personally don't think you look like Winnie the Pooh. Instead, I think you look damn good in leather. Thank you.
So John, I'm going to have Zach talk about the CTF here real quick. The CTF will take place inside the Discord. No, Zach, tell us the new way of doing the CTF.
Well, still need access to our Webcast CTF channel because I'm going to post the link in there. So if you all would like to participate in this week's CTF, I'm going to be posting the link in our Webcast CTF channel right meow, and you will get tagged. And for this week's challenge, I think we have 8 questions in there, and we'll be picking winners on next Monday. So please take your time. You have a few days to go through those answers there, go through the questions, submit your answers, and then we'll be choosing 2 winners. One winner will receive a full 1-year access to anti-siphon training on demand. So you'll get access to all of our classes there. And then another winner will be able to pick one class of their choice from the anti-siphon training catalog. So if that's something you are interested in, please participate in this week's CTF.
And the CTF isn't like, here's the IP address for some place in China, and then here's like a...
No. We're not doing any of that. No,
Okay.
sir.
All right.
This one's safe. It's all questions.
Okay. All right.
You're gonna be hacking China.
Any chance Rita getting Arch Linux support?
We're going to stick with the Linux distributions that we have now. Thank you. There is such thing as like supporting too many Linux distributions. Trust me.
Are we getting a way to show the webinar attendance so we can get CPE credit for SANS renewal? Yes, everyone that registered today, you do get an email from a thing called Accreditable. So if you've attended a webcast in the past, most likely it's gone to your spam filter or your other filter or other inbox, and it's from Accreditable, like credit, like Accreditable, and then we send you the certificate of attendance to your inbox that you registered for this webcast, and we've been doing it for like a long time. So if you were to go in there and do a search for Accreditable, you'd probably find like, oh my God, look at all these CPE credits I have. Oh, okay.
And did it all for the CPE credits.
Someone asked for the link to John's class, so I'm going to put that into the response here. And then What was the video that you referenced of the guy? I think it was HD Moore being carted from talk to talk whilst in China.
So he gave that presentation at one of the very first hack fests that Ed Scotus did, Jason. It
Mhm.
was I think the first one we ever did was in Caesar's Palace, and we went out to Bradley Ogden and had dinner. And I think that was his talk where he talked about that. Now, I don't know if that one was actually recorded, but he talked about how he went to China to give some presentations on Metasploit. They took him to an auditorium, and then he gave his presentation, and then they took him to another auditorium, and he gave the same presentation, and then they took him to another auditorium, and he jokes about how he was afraid he was never going to leave China. So that's the whole story behind that. I don't know if that video was ever released.
Another question. Where did the snippet about the CDO and PLA come from?
CDO. Okay, so that snippet came from. Let me open that up. I've got two. It's mediadefense.gov. Let me put that in Discord. I've got to get to the Black Hills live chat channel. All right. So I'm going to put that link in there, which is a great resource. And then there's also Digital China Wins the Future. This is absolutely a Chinese propaganda website,
Oh.
but it's great for resources where they talk about what they want to do. Because one of the things about China that's interesting is they're very upfront with what they want to do. And honestly, I think it's because they think we're too stupid to look. And to be honest, they're probably right. But yeah, I've just shared two amazing links that you should read to get a better understanding. One's from the United States military, and the other one is from Chinese military. So there you go. So a couple of good ones there for you.
Yeah, so I think this might be a question that a lot of people have. If China's goal is to monitor, collect info, interpret, when does it act?
So that's interesting because there's two possibilities when you're talking about action for China. The first possibility of action, well, three. The first possibility of action for China is if they invade Taiwan, right? So if they invade Taiwan, there will be action. All right. The second thing is if China is ever directly attacked. China is definitely afraid that the United States is going to attack them, not just the US, but the West in general. And you may think, well, that's crazy. But no, you look at their history and the trauma, not just like the fact that they were invaded, but the horrible brutality that that entire country endured. You can kind of understand why they're a little bit like gun shy about that. And the third option is never. But they would much rather have those like technological kill switches in place and not need them than like have something happen and then they need them very quickly. So those are the three options. Either China, they feel like they've been attacked or they are outwardly attacked or never.
So, question for you, John.
Mhm.
And this is a personal question for John. John, why do you like to teach?
Mhm. To be honest with you, it's a drug. And I'm not joking. Like for me, one of the greatest things that I've ever done is being able to teach people and have them get started in the industry. And there's this magical moment where they get it, right? Where they do a lab and you see the light go on in their eyes. Or like watching on Discord is one of my favorite things that to just see people click and they're like, oh my God, I finally understand this for the first time in my entire life. And there's a magical hit that you get when you do that. That you just can't get it anywhere else. I don't care, like being on stage, lots of people. It's just from a professional perspective, being there at the beginning of something is precious, right? Being there at the beginning where that spark goes, the fire takes off, and then talking to somebody, years later where they come up to you and they're like, here's my career, here's all the things I've done, and I want you to know that I did all of this because you lit that spark. And I just think that I'm very lucky. I'm blessed, and I think everybody at BHIS is as well. And it also kind of goes back to the kind of like anti-siphon. Let's get into a little bit of advertising. We don't charge as much as other places because we try to get that drug as much as we can. And if our classes are affordable, we get that drug more. So please go take our classes. But no, whether it's pay what you can, you look at the people that are here, that are present and accounted for, and the mission of what we're doing, and it's just ingrained in our DNA.
Yeah.
And John, you said that you believe education is the solution to everything. I think that core philosophy, that core belief has run through it for a very long time for you. So,
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Oh my God, Jeremy Baca is here. Jeremy Baca is another instructor. I've done some work with him in the past. Dude, you got to come out to the conference sometime, man. Like I haven't seen you in years. So that's so cool. So
So this is my pitch. Please come join us at Walrus Hack and Fest Denver. It is an opportunity for us to get a chance to hang out with you and talk with you, and for you to talk with us instead of us talking at you. It is probably one of my favorite two times of the years when we get a chance where all of you come together. And the one thing that I've learned about those of you that are listening here is that you all would genuinely like each other. You're here, you're listening, you're learning collectively everywhere where you're at. But when you get a chance to come together in one place and get a chance to meet each other, it is magical. And I love getting a chance to do it. So please come to Walrus Hack and Fest Denver or Deadwood. And with that, we're going to give you an opportunity to leave if you want to, because we're going to talk about what it's like to do business with Black Hills Information Security. And so if you have questions about what it's like to do business with Black Hills Information Security, please go ahead and ask. We got CJ here. We got Tom Smith here. We got John is going to stick around. John, you sticking around?
I've got to eat, but I can stick around for a little bit for sure.
It's like 5 minutes, maybe, unless.
Okay, that's fine. Unless it gets crazy, but let's do it.
All right. So I always like to ask Tom this first question, and I think Tom knows it's coming. Not everyone knows it's coming, but Tom knows it's coming. And so, Tom, what's it like to work on commission to feed your family?
I wouldn't know.
Why not, Tom?
I'll tell you.
Okay,
thanks for setting me up. No, we don't earn commission here, so we don't sell anything and get a spiff for it. So it's great. People reach out to us, say, "Hey, we want to work with BHIS," and my job as, like the sales guy or a sales guy, I guess, is really just to, listen to what people want and see if it's something that we offer. And if it's something that we offer them, we'll write something down and see if it makes sense. And we'll come up with a price that makes sense for it. And we'll end up doing business. But I mean, we say no to probably as many customers as we say yes to. We don't want to push somebody into buying something they don't want. Nobody's happy with that arrangement. So
when John hired me, not just as COO, he gave me that title so people would talk to me if they had to. But I had never done sales before. I mean, I was a junior sysadmin. I was an ISO. I was an ISE. I did all these dumb things. And John's like, come in here. And he trained me to do sales in 2 days. And I was nervous as hell. I'm like, how am I going to do this? And John's like, it's just like you're at a con talking to people. You just talk to them. And if they're talking to us about something that we provide, you just talk. And I love that because it was never we never had the pressure. And we say we proudly suck at capitalism. And as Tom said, we talk our way out of as many things. If you're giving us a pitch for a problem and we're not a good fit for you, like we are so casual and easy about, oh yeah, that's not, we don't do that, or you should just try this, or here's a free resource. And I got to tell you, it's a great way of life. I miss the sales so much, actually.
Oh, the customer calls are definitely the best part of the job. There's no doubt. No, it's great talking with people out in the community about like what's going on, what people are worried about. What my favorite thing about the job that we get to do is sort of help people sort of define where they are security-wise today, and then help them come up with a plan for where they want to be in the future, taking into consideration all the things that are specific to their business, their industry, what their concerns are, like what the future holds for them, and then help them come up with a plan for how to get there.
Yeah. So, John, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I forgot what I was going to say.
I was going to say, John, why do you force the sales team to just hound anyone that sends a contact us form? It's just
Yeah, I don't have any idea what that is either. I've never done that. I hate high pressure sales, right? Like I feel like it's slimy and it's ingrained in our industry. And I don't know, I feel like it's set the tempo and whatever. People watch Glenn Ross and think that that's reality. And it sucks because sometimes it makes reality, I guess. So to do that differently, I would much rather have customers that we actually are friends with. Like, I don't know. I was talking to Tom, like one of our favorite things is customers that call us up and literally they set up a meeting to say, we have done pen tests with you for the past 3 or 5 years. And we need to tell you that we're not going to go with BHIS anymore because we have to rotate to another vendor, like rotate out to a trusted sec or CounterHack and Guardians, Red Siege. There's a ton of companies, Secure Ideas, right? They rotate out to another firm, but they get on a call with us to apologize. And that is fantastic, right? But once again, it's kind of like Jason, you kept saying, come to Wildest Hacking Fest because we like hanging out with each other. I love having our customers come hang out with us. And it's just, I don't know, I'd rather live this life than live the life of like, Tom, you got to get your numbers, man. And it's not fun for me. It's not fun for anybody else. It was funny. We had another firm, a very, very, very large security firm. They do a bunch of security services, and we hired some of their employees because it's rough working at that company. And one of the salespeople at that company came and asked one of our employees. They said, "We heard that BHIS only has like 2 or 3 salespeople. Is that true?" Because they had like 20. And the guy was like, "Yeah, it's true." And he then said, "We don't have an outbound sales function. It's all inbound sales." And they couldn't believe it. Right. So it works this way. It works great. And once again, it's really about doing business with people that you want to be friends with and you're okay hanging out with them. And as Tom said, yeah, we do fire customers. It's just not going to be a good fit. It's not going to be a good vibe. They're going to be like abusive to our testers. So we move on. And the way that we do it allows Tom and Logan and Brian to be able to do that.
yeah. So no yacht.
No,
No, not yet. Still working on the yacht.
Yeah.
working on the yacht. We do have the hacker house though.
Yeah.
We do have the hacker house.
True.
I don't know if Joff is still on, but Joff has been at the hacker house.
Mhm.
There's video of Joff and I on a merry-go-round in Costa Rica, where I'm pretty sure we almost died. That was fun. So we got that.
So far we've gotten 2 comments.
I got summoned.
I was just talking about the merry-go-round,
Yeah.
Joff.
Um,
Like that was bad because Joff was on the outside and I was on the inside, and I'm bigger than Joff. And I was crushing him into the door. And while I'm crushing him into the door, Joff looks at me and he goes, "I don't think this door is very secure." Like it was bad, bad. Also, the Carney smiling at us and revved it up faster.
oh yeah, had a shading grin, and he turned the dial to
Oh
11.
my God. Yeah. And I'm not joking. We have pictures. We have pictures of this in
We
video.
do. We still do. By the way, I've got the zip file anytime.
Yeah.
All right. So step 1, if you want to work with Black Hills, is to go to the blackhillsinfosec.com website, go to the contact us form, let us know what you're looking for. Nora or Melissa will get back to you within most likely like an hour to set up a time for you to then reach out to Tom, Logan, and CJ, and potentially Brian and others to talk to about what you need. Had 2 comments so far. Someone said, having used BHIS, I can personally attest it's different than any other vendor. Thank you for that. My only feedback is I don't get a personal hug from John Strand with each engagement. And that,
Come to the
You know how you do
conference.
that? Do you know how you get those personal hugs? You come to the conference.
that is true. And then another comment, as a BHIS customer, I can say that they have been easy and wonderful engagement. Sales, contract, and services were all smooth and informative. Thank you. And then Edwin asks, is there a replay for yesterday's job hunting like a hacker edition? I'll see if I can. All right. So CJ, being here for 6 years, how has Black Hills changed over the last 6 years?
It's a great question.
First of all, it's 9 years, but it's counting.
The 6 turned out to be a 9.
It's 6 for us, Jason.
Upside
I feel like we
down.
need to buckle our seatbelt right now.
Oh my gosh, it's just grown, and it's such a tension between growth and not growing. And quite frankly, the reason we always grew is because we'd get to the end of the year and we couldn't serve our customers. So the predominant of upset customers, the people who couldn't get in Q4, and so we'd be like, we need more, we need more. And then we grew because we're like, oh, you know what we need? We need a SOC, because a SOC is a good place for offense to feed defense and defense to do offense. A great place for entry-level jobs, so we did that. And then previous employers went a little haywire, and so we needed to do training. So all this caused all this growth, and growth has been hard. When I came in the door, we were under 40 people, and now we're over 160 people, and that's a lot. And that's the big change. We desperately struggled to maintain the feel and the culture, and I think we've been very successful with that, which is probably one of the things I'm most satisfied with. But it is a struggle, and it is getting hard, but we keep bringing people in that are willing to help. So
Yeah. And, CJ brought up something that's really, really important, is like the culture fit. When we're bringing in new people, that's like the biggest thing that we're looking for. It's not just skill set. I mean, it's culture fit. I mean, really, you got to buy into the culture. So when we're looking for new people or even new customers, like John said a minute ago, like that's a primary thing we're looking for, is culture fit.
Yeah. John, if somebody wanted to work with Black Hills and they've attended the webcast, they've taken the training, they've done all this, they've grown in their careers, they've reached the point of influence, and now it's time for them to hire Black Hills, what is something that they should expect when they get us as their vendor of choice?
Okay, so one of the things a very good friend of ours, Jason, had talked to us about was we ask a lot of questions at the beginning of the scoping rules of engagement, right? And somebody was like, man, they ask a lot of questions. And the reason why is because anytime we're doing an assessment, we really try to learn as much as we can about your environment. And that means before the engagement even begins, right? So there'll be questions like sensitive systems. Are there any systems that go down? Are there any systems that went down during a previous pen test? And there's a lot of questions about who do we call? Who's the primary point of contact? Who's the follow-up point of contact? And a lot of that is built around trying to make sure the engagement goes as smooth as possible, number one. And number two, the organization gets what they're looking for out of that engagement, right? What are the reasons why we're actually there? So expect a lot of communication. And it's funny. I don't know, CJ and I talk about this a lot with our testers. We almost over communicate, and still you have customers that are like, some more communication would have been better. So it's like, you almost never can get too much, but we're constantly trying to stay in as much communication as we can with our customers.
All right. I have one question here, and then we'll finish up with one last one. But Daniel asks, I have a 120 user company. Would BHIS work with a smaller company?
Yeah, we do all the time. Yep.
Okay. All right. And then this last one is, let's say somebody wanted to work at Black Hills in the future. And I'm summarizing this question just so that we can finish. If someone wanted, what are we looking for? Like, what's the thing that we're looking for?
So I want to get my wife this shirt. It says, I believe in unicorns, because when we're talking about the people that we hire, there are people at BHIS that are they're unicorns, right? They're technically excellent. Their communication is excellent. Their kindness is excellent, right? And we're constantly looking for those unicorns. And I can tell you, there's a couple of things if you're not a unicorn. If you do CTFs and you're kind of like, yeah, it's kind of cool, probably not. If you're someone that is really good at memorizing multiple choice, but not really taking things apart, probably not a fit. If you're somebody that looks at the rest of the world and says, these people are idiots for clicking on links. These people are idiots because they didn't patch their server. These people are idiots for this and that, and everybody's dumb and I'm really smart and all that. Probably not going to be a good fit here. If you're somebody that has a really big, like you love technology, you love understanding things, and you desperately want to share with other people, that's the sign of a really good fit. It's just kind of seems to be the type of people that gravitate here and stay here as well.
And to be fair, there's tremendous amount of luck involved. As a guy who had no talent whatsoever, I can tell you that there's a tremendous amount of luck involved. It's just timing, and just exposure at the right moment. I look at all these people flying around on Discord, and I'm like, probably any one of those people might work here. It's just a matter of when the need arises, when you arise in front of us at the right moment, and boom. And John's always said, look, trying to get in with us is the same as trying to get in with any of the great firms. There's lots of great firms too. So it's hard to say, oh, you can all come here because you're a culture fit and you're a ninja. It's a combination of all those things, but don't discount the luck and the timing thing.
All right. Yeah. Well, we're going to wrap it up, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking around, listening to what it's like to do business with Black Hills Information Security. If you want to do that, you can reach out to us through the blackhillsinfosec.com website. And this includes corporate sales for training. If you need training for you and your entire team, feel free to reach out to us for that. And you'll talk to someone like Tom or Logan. And then we'll ask a lot of questions and we'll make sure that we give you the best possible service we possibly can. And with that, thank you all so much for your time today. Deb, final thoughts.
Oh, final thoughts. Just thank you. We know there's a lot of noise out there. Thanks for showing up to a talk about China and clicking on a link that has China in it. So I appreciate that. And we love you guys. That's all.
All right, everybody. All right, Ryan. Kill it with fire, Ryan.
Kill it.
Kill it, Ryan.